we started to have a Buddhist center in Cluj, White Mahakala Center. And after 1 year or 2 years, we had another FPMT center in Bucharest called Compassion Wisdom Flower.
They're both named by Lama Zopa Rinpoche.
Yes, both names are given by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and we are very happy and grateful for that. Today we have our traditional meeting with Venerable Robina. We hope that maybe next year, or who knows how soon, she will come in person and we will be able to see each other properly. I really pray for that.
I hope so too.
Yes. Robina Courtin is a Tibetan Buddhist nun, ordained in 1978 in Gelugpa tradition. She was ordained by Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe, who are our spiritual guides through the Foundation of Preservation of Mahayana tradition. She is very known for her wonderful project called Liberation Prison Project that helped, I think thousands and thousands of prisoners to be able to somehow be back in the life with a much better perspective on that. Since she was born, she wanted to be. She was born as a Catholic, but she was very interested all the time in becoming a nun, a Catholic nun. But in the end, after the meeting in 1976, I think, with Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe, she decided to go in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. That was a joy for a lot of people, including us. And today we will have the great and wonderful pleasure to spend 3 hours listening to her. So, Venerable Robina Courtin.
So happy to be here. Yeah. And it was in 2017 was my first time in Europe, actually. No, first time in Romania. I'd been in Europe since I was an old hippie. I mean, after I was a Catholic, I became a hippie, then a communist, then a black political activist, then a feminist activist. That's when I met the Lama. So I was a bit in between Catholic and Buddhist, you know. But I lived in London in the 60s and 70s, but I never went to Romania. I remember taking the train one time during the Soviet times, but I somehow didn't get to Romania. So I was very happy to go there, and I think it's a lovely place, and you people I like very much. I like you Romanians. So I hope to go again soon.
Okay. We can't wait.
Yes, good. Do we have a little prayer? Have we got the prayer? We can say it in English, and it would be nice to have it in Romanian. Have we got the refuge prayer, Anne or Marius, to put on the screen? If we do. If not, it's okay.
No, we are not prepared.
We don't have. Okay, no problem. So I'm going to sing a little prayer to start, okay? Sort of. Oh, you have it in English. Oh. Don't worry. Okay, we'll leave it. We'll have it then, okay. Okay. No, don't put it. Put it back. Take it away. But first, it's auspicious, Marius or Anne, either one of you, it's auspicious to offer a mandala to request the teachings. Can one of you sing it? Are you good, Umze? Do you know how to sing the Tibetan prayer? Or shall I sing it? Huh? Answer. One of you. Because the center should offer a mandala. That's the job of the center, to offer a mandala and request the teaching. So I can lead it if you'd like me to. Just tell me yes or no. Marius, what do you want me to do?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
I will lead it. Okay. So first I'll do, it's a little traditional thing. First I'll do is sing a little prayer. But prayer is words, and words are thoughts, and thoughts count. Thoughts are important, you know. So this one is just, it's like from Marius and Anne, or whoever's sponsoring this little group we got this morning. We're going to offer to the Buddha, think of all the marvelous things of the world and pile them all up and imagine offering to the Buddha as a request for these teachings. Thinking like that. It's got some nice meaning. Saji perki jugshing metog tramri rablingji ni de gen padi sange jingdu mikte ulwagi drokon nam dag jingla chapashok. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. And I'll sing one more prayer. And this one is two meanings. The first part is for anybody in this group who already identifies with being a Buddhist, is kind of like reminding yourself of your reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. But the second two lines, the Tibetans or the Buddhists would say, to set our motivation for doing this activity. But we might say, what's our purpose? Why are we here together for this couple of hours, 3 hours, you know? Well, it's ostensibly is to listen to these views about the Buddhist view of life, happiness, suffering, what causes suffering, blah, 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 how to stop suffering. That's what Buddhism's about. So we're thinking we're going to listen to this so we can take some tools from it. You know, it's because it's advice. You don't need to take it, but it is advice. So if there's anything that makes sense, you think of taking this as advice to do what? One, help you develop your own marvelous potential to be less neurotic, less depressed, less anxious, less angry, more kind, more wise, more compassionate. That's the idea. So that from your own sake, and then because we all live in this crazy world together, so that you can be of benefit to others. That's the general kind of motivation, and this expressed in this other little prayer. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyap suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shog sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyap suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shog Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyap suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok. Okay. So first it's important to know where all these ideas come from. You know, if we're religious, or if we are like the rest, most of the world, and we think of religion, a religious philosophy, because that's what it is, as sort of like coming from on high, coming from revelation or something like that, then, you know, it's a surprise to hear that Buddhism isn't like that. I always remember one time in New Zealand, years ago, in fact, it was a scientist, and he was at the teaching, and he happened to ask me, and this is the first time anybody has ever asked me this question. It was very interesting. He said, who revealed all these teachings to the Buddha? So obviously, I mean, I was brought up a Catholic, right? I mean, many of you might have been Christian or religious of some kind. So that's the usual view, isn't it? It's the assumption that a creator, who is, you know, the creator of the universe, the creator of the concepts, the boss, if you like, who has the power to punish and reward, which is reasonable if he's the boss, you know? I mean, speaking like this. So that's our usual view of religion. So this man listening to these teachings, who happened to be a scientist, and it was a really excellent question. Who revealed all these ideas to the Buddha? And when I answered him, he was quite shocked and everybody laughed, because it does sound shocking. I said, would you ask Einstein, who revealed all his ideas about relativity and the rest, who revealed these ideas to Einstein? So everyone laughed. Of course they did, because we know that that's what we mean by science, is some intelligent person has observed the universe and has identified certain things, has come up with a series of laws, has proved those laws, has codified them, and then presents them. Well, big surprise, that's who Buddha is. I mean, it's quite surprising to us, because but I think in order to listen, and it's reasonable, if you want to listen to some ideas, a philosophy, you ought to know where it's coming from. You know, it's really important. You need to know that there's a valid source. I mean, one of the first things they always say when you start investigating Buddhism, Buddha always would say, don't believe what I'm telling you. It's up to you to decide if it's valid or not. You know, in other words, in the view in Buddhism, there's no concept that, as it was in my own Catholic upbringing, it's not a question of having blind faith. That fits if you believe in a creator, but not here. So it's a crucial point to just remember if we haven't heard the Buddha's views before, or indeed if we have heard them before. It's important to think, what is the source of this information? Who said this? Where does it come from? It's a completely appropriate question. And before you do anything, you should ask that. If you listen to some music, you should check that musician is valid. If you read a cookbook, you want to know the person who wrote the book is valid, that this is valid information coming from a valid source. That's called intelligence. But unfortunately, as soon as we hear the word religion or spiritual, we seem to lose all common sense. We think, oh, I'm allowed to believe what I like. You know, I mean, it's kind of intellectual laziness, actually. But this is certainly the Buddhist approach. So who is Buddha? He was this bloke, this Indian man, you know, who came along 2,500 years ago. But where did he come from? What was his tradition? Well, you know, this is only becoming known more now in our modern world. The incredible, unbelievable depth and breadth of philosophical, metaphysical, spiritual information that was around in India well before, you know, our European culture, well before Christianity. And that's a surprise to us. It's only now, with the Dalai Lama being in the modern world and having all these conversations with the best scientists in the West, the best thinkers, the best neuroscientists, and only now is so much of the information coming that we are starting to appreciate that India was a pretty incredible place, well before the Buddha. It was the Dalai Lama who said, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. And that's a big surprise. We probably thought it was Mr. Freud 100 years ago. We're kind of arrogant, you know. And it's only now that people are appreciating this, which is marvelous. So Buddha came out of this extraordinary tradition. He went as far as he could go in his own investigation of the nature of self, and indeed the nature of the universe, because this is the point in Buddhism. And then he then diverged in his own direction with his own particular findings, experiential findings about the nature of self. So this is what we're going to discuss today, basically, this concept of attachment. It's pointing to this crucial central discussion, which is the central discussion in Buddhism, the point in Buddhist philosophy, the point of Buddhist psychology, is to understand what is the self, who are we, and therefore what is our potential, and therefore what is happiness and what is suffering, and how do we get rid of suffering, and how do we get happiness. This is surely the pursuit of every living being. This is what is behind our scientific thinkings. This is what initially was behind the idealistic view of the communist thinkings. You look around the world, you know, humans have come up with various viewpoints about these very topics. Well, this is the Buddha's approach, okay? So because the Buddha is not a creator, and okay, so the first thing is he doesn't posit a creator. This is something fundamental about Buddhism. He doesn't just, he's got his own philosophical views and findings. Basically, we don't need creating. Buddha's view is quite radically different, and we'll go into this. But the Buddha does not assert a creator. He is not a creator. He's a regular person who did this hard internal work of discovering the true nature of his own self, that's the words they use, and rid the mind of happiness and rid the mind of suffering and cultivated happiness, whatever you like. So there's the word Buddha itself is very telling, you know, which is the end result of this work. If you're a Mahayana Buddhist, there's different strains of Buddhism throughout the world. The goal of becoming a Buddha is the goal. So Buddha, the etymology of this word is very delicious. Bud, the first syllable, Sanskrit, implies the total eradication from one's own mind, from one's own consciousness, of all fears, all ego, all depression, anxiety, attachment, anger, jealousy, you name it. All these words, all these experiences that we are intimately familiar with. This is the radical point that Buddha has found from his own experience, that this stuff in us is not intrinsic to who we are and can be removed. And this is the job of being a Buddhist. But not only can we do that, the second syllable, da, implies the total eradicate, the development to perfection of all the other stuff in our mind. We all know it. Wisdom, clarity, love, compassion, empathy, blah, 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 you know. This is the essence of the Buddhist approach. So if that's the end result, Buddha, then obviously the methodology is implied. And this is where the essence of all the Buddha's practice come to. It's all about the mind. That's Buddha's expertise. That might be surprising to us because we don't think of spiritual to do with the mind. We would say, oh, that's a separate one and that's called psychology. Well, Buddha didn't speak Greek then. That's just a Greek word. But it's about the mind. Buddha's expertise is the mind. And this is going to be our discussion today. Okay, so if he has found, this is the point. If the Buddha has found from his own experience and is said to have accomplished this goal, that's what he presents, that we can rid our mind, completely rid our mind, get rid of, throw out all the limitations, all the sources of our suffering. We know the words very well. We know the word anger. We know the word fear, jealousy, anxiety, depression. There are thousands of variations of these, you know. This is the point that Buddha's found. If it is possible, if it is true, we can get rid of those, then we obviously have to know how to identify them. And that's the job. That's the actual job. And if we can develop to perfection all the other parts of our mind, we can develop extraordinary levels of wisdom and clarity and kindness and love and empathy and courage and optimism and self-confidence. This is literally the Buddhist approach. Then if we can cultivate those, we better know how to distinguish those. Now that's the part that's the difficult job. This is the difficult job. Because as we know now in our daily lives, from the time we wake up in the morning until the time we go to sleep, there's two things in the universe as far as we're concerned. There's the outside world, mummy and daddy and the husband and children and the boss and the traffic and the ugly people and the nice people, everything in the outside world. From the second we open our eyes and our senses wake up, that's what we're involved in, the outside world. But then there's the other aspect, is what's going on in here. That's the Buddha's expertise. And the Buddhist approach is, and it's very literal, honey, kind people, if you want to stop suffering, and if you want to be happy, the job to do is the internal one, which doesn't contradict having handsome husbands and plenty of money in the bank. He's not contradicting that. But basically, one of the essential points in Buddha's own experiential findings about what is possible, he's literally saying that we are mistaken in thinking that, okay, first he says, everyone wants happiness. Check this out. This is almost too simple. He says, if you look around the world, everybody in the universe, not just the humans, the monkeys, the ants, the dogs, everybody instinctively wants happiness and instinctively doesn't want suffering. This is kind of obvious. So in the presentation of the teachings that Buddha gave when he first became this enlightened being, this is the way they talk about it, and he first taught what he had found to be true, he gave this teaching, they call it the Four Noble Truths. The Four Truths about life. And it's all framed in terms of suffering. There is suffering, there are causes, you can get rid of it, and how to do it, basically. So the Buddha's approach, and this is from his own experiential findings, not from revelation, is that the main source of happiness and the main source of suffering, among those two things, the outside world and the inner world, he says the main cause of happiness and the main cause of suffering is in our own mind. Now this is clearly not what we think. This is clearly not the findings of neuroscience. It is not the view in many of our psychological models in the modern world. Clearly not. So it takes time to hear it because the words are pretty simple. But to really hear and to begin to experience the truth of that, that's the point. Not to merely believe it. And of course, hearing it initially, it sounds quite heavy. You know, if you're angry, so in other words, if my boyfriend, and you see me crying, Robina, what's wrong? Well, why are you suffering? And my immediate answer will be, my boyfriend shouted at me. So you won't argue with me. You will say, you will know the world thinks this. That's a valid reason for me to be suffering. Buddha totally agrees. It is not appropriate to be mean to somebody. He totally agrees. But he's saying that's not the only issue here. There's a really good saying in Buddhism. If you can change something, please change it. If you can. But what if you can't? And this is the crucial point. And if we look into our lives, we will see very simply in one day, just in one day, things will happen that we don't want. That's what we mean by suffering. Think about it. The simplest way of describing suffering at the grossest level, at the most simple level, is when the bad things happen. In other words, when the things that happen that I don't want to happen. We know that's called suffering. It can be very small suffering, it can be very big suffering, but we know that's what we mean by suffering. So naturally, the instinct in us, and this process is what we're going to analyze. That instinct in us is to change it, make it go away. You know, stop the boyfriend from being mean, make the bank give me money, stop the bad weather, make sure the food is good. That's the first instinct we have, and we spend immense amount of energy trying to do that. Now again, even the Buddhist approach does not argue with that. Don't just give up and be stupid, don't be passive. Nothing wrong with trying to get what you want. There's nothing wrong with trying to change things. But the crucial point is when we really look at this point, what if you can't change it? What if you can't? Then this is the point where we start to need this analysis, you know. If we could get everything we wanted every time, no problem. Don't worry about it, analyzing it. So what is Buddha's analysis? Well, this is where the mind comes in. And what does he mean by the mind? When we say the mind in the modern world, we equate it with literally the brain. Nothing wrong with that. But the Buddhist analysis is very clear that, and this is the first point that's quite radical, that mind or consciousness, these words are used synonymously. They are not physical. We have a brain, there is no argument. But that's not the Buddha's expertise. And these Indians before him, their expertise, they mapped the mind. They're the ones who created, this technique that the world knows these days as mindfulness meditation. It's, there are very many variations of it, but it's based upon this technique the Indians invented more than 3,000 years ago. This extraordinary psychological skill that enables us to completely control and harness and subdue this seemingly uncontrollable series of constant thoughts that we don't seem to have any control over. This technique enables us, and it's hard work, it'll take you several years to get it in the right conditions, to be able to go to completely subdue that level of mind and to access a subtler level of mind. Now, this is not posited even as existing in modern neuroscience, so we have to listen to this, keep an open mind. We have these much subtler levels of mind, much subtler levels of cognition. And it's crucial from the Buddhist point of view to get this goal of getting rid of the rubbish and getting the goodness. You've got to access that subtle level. It's like the microscope of your mind. This is unique to the Buddha's approach, So, okay, this mind of ours, when Buddha says the word mind, they also use the word consciousness, and these words are virtually synonymous. Number two, it is not referring to the physical. He's not denying the existence of the physical. These marvelous discussions that Dalai Lama and all the Buddhists, the Tibetan Buddhists in particular, are having with all the neuroscientists, this complete, coming together of these seemingly very different views, which is what is marvelous, But the Buddha's expertise is not the brain, it's not the physical, it's the non-physical process of cognition, which is what our mind is. And the Buddhist approach is, based on this technique these Indians invented 3,000 years ago, is that we can go into our mind at a very subtle level. We need to do this in the long term. And why? Why would we want to do that? Because the Buddhist approach, that what goes on in my mind, from the second I wake up until the second I go to sleep, we know there's this constant stream of thousands upon thousands upon thousands of thoughts, so crowded together, we can't even hear one at a time. I think in modern psychology, they even say you've got about 1,000 thoughts a second. Buddha would agree. So the experience of our mind, most of the time, we don't even notice it. Why? Because the second we wake up, we are preoccupied with the outside world. We're completely fixated on the food, the breakfast, the husband, the car, the this, the that. And why are we preoccupied? Well, we need to navigate the world, otherwise we'll die. But we are also totally convinced deep in our bones that that's where happiness is and that's where suffering is. So we spend our lives using our mind to navigate this outside world, attempting to get the nice things, because we believe when I get the cake and get the boyfriend and get the job and get the loan in the bank and get the new house, and this is not meant to be moralistic. This is like a practical issue. There's an instinctive view within us we take for granted, that we do not question, that happiness is out there somewhere, and then suffering is out there somewhere, and that comes along from left field, doesn't it, and punches us in the nose, and we avoid the suffering and try to get the happiness. So Buddha's agreeing, go for it. We need to get happiness, and we need to avoid suffering, on the basis of which we can then help others. But all he's saying is, in a simple sense, all he's saying is, you're missing the main point. You're missing the main point. Have $100,000, I'm happy. Have 14 husbands, I don't care. But you're missing the main point. That's all he's saying. And the main point is what goes on in your mind. What that means is these thousands of thoughts that we basically experience as just like in the back of it's in the back. When everything is going okay, we don't pay attention to the mind at all. But we hear from behind, don't we? This constant stream of thoughts. We call it unconscious. We don't even notice it. But the only time we notice what's going on in our mind is when the bad thing happens, and then the anger rises, or the depression comes, or the jealousy, or the anxiety. And then we begin to notice these crazy thoughts. And that's when we freak out, So the Buddhist analysis is, yes, the outside world, nothing wrong. But learn to see what is going on in your mind. And what that means is these thoughts basically are actually, they're all viewpoints. Our thoughts are viewpoints. Even our feelings are viewpoints. We don't think they're viewpoints. We just think they're the truth. So that's the Buddhist expertise, to develop the ability, one, to get this type of concentration, this so-called mindfulness. That's just a technique. But then two, if you're a serious Buddhist, you would study Buddha's very specific model of the mind. Exactly what is the mind? What are the contents? How do they function? What is this? What is that? Because you need to learn to distinguish these thousands of thoughts and label every single one. I mean, this is very surprising to us because we don't notice our thoughts until they become emotion. You don't notice you are angry until the words are vomiting out your mouth and you are shaking. You don't notice you are depressed until you are inert in bed and cannot move. But that's just too late. This is the problem. This is the Buddhist approach. So that's when we go to the therapist. That's when we take a pill. That's when we think, oh, I better meditate. People say it makes you feel better. But it's just too late. This is a really crucial point. Our mind is running all the time, whether we like it or not. So the job to do is to learn these skills, to pay attention to what on earth is going on in the mind, even when you're happy. But we're not interested in that. If you're in love with your new boyfriend and someone says you should learn to meditate, you'll be shocked. But why should I? I'm happy. Because we have these weird misconceptions. But this is how we are in our world. When you don't go to your therapist because you're happy. You know, the therapist is a person there is like when you've got a broken leg, you've got a broken mind, and you've got to sneak off with guilt and shame because you can't handle your life. That's completely the wrong approach. The Buddha's view says our mind is at much subtler levels, and if we can learn to navigate our mind and become familiar with it and identify all the components, the thoughts, the thousands of thoughts, this is literally what being a Buddhist is. It might be a surprise to us. We don't hear it in such practical terms. Then you can navigate your life when things are good, and then when things go bad, then you can navigate as well. In other words, you don't learn to drive the car just when bad things happen, you know? You can learn to drive the car all the time. And once you've learned the skill, then when the bad things do happen, you can navigate them nicely. But we don't think like that. We go to the therapist only when we're having a problem. We take a pill only when we have a problem. But the Buddhist approach is much more preventative, you know, as well as curative. Preventative mostly. But I mean, look at the suffering on our planet. I mean, look at us. The mental suffering, the anxiety, the anger, the fears, the jealousy. It's just rampant. Look at the crazy people, human beings, you know, because we don't pay attention to what is going on in our mind and when we do pay attention, it's way too late, you know. It's like it's craziness. And this is just pointing to the fact that in our culture, we don't think what goes on in the mind matters. This is a very interesting point. This is a profound point, actually. I remember Lama Zopa Rinpoche saying, and this is shocking, the vast majority of all humans on the planet have no idea that what goes on in their mind, meaning their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions, they have no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their life. In other words, it's proving the point that Buddha's making. As far as we are concerned, the outside world is everything. And our mind is a mere passive responder to the outside world. That's why we think the boyfriend is the problem. Why are you suffering, Robina? My boyfriend was mean. Buddha doesn't argue with that, but he says we're missing the crucial point. Now, if you can get your boyfriend to behave nicely, check the world, please. It is difficult to get someone to do what you want. We know that. Then go for it, no problem. But what if you can't? This is where the work starts. So what's going on in the mind, and what is it I need to change? If it's the mind, if my interpretations in my own mind, if my thoughts and feelings and emotions are the main source of my capacity for happiness and suffering, then I need to learn to identify them precisely. And it's that level of precision that we know you need just to make a cake. To do mathematics, to play the piano, we need incredible clarity and precision and analysis. That is what we need to employ from the Buddhist perspective if we're really doing the job properly of learning to unpack and unravel and deconstruct these thousands of opinions and viewpoints and emotions and feelings, this emotional chaos. That is what we need to unpack and unravel and learn to become in control of it. This is the essence of the job of being a Buddhist. This is Buddha's expertise. And it's the hardest job we'll ever do. The first reason is because we don't believe what goes on in here is the main source of the problem. We believe the outside world is the main source of the problem. This is already hard to see. Because if we hear it wrongly, it sounds like, oh, you mean it's my fault? No, Buddha's not saying that. He just says, look at what's in your mind and then know that you can change it. So this is the difficulty. This is why I found it always very empowering to use examples of when I was working with my friends in prison. As Anne mentioned, she started in the mid-90s when I was editing Mandala, the magazine of our organization. I was based in California. I'm from Australia, but I was based in California since the mid-90s, and I was editing our magazine, and we got a letter from a young American. He told me he's Mexican-American from Los Angeles, and he's been in gangs since he was 11, in prison since he was 12. He was then 18, and he just he's had three life sentences in prison. The sentencing in the American prisons in general is pretty shocking. I mean, it's a pretty intense situation in this country. Maybe they're changing, maybe it's getting worse. I mean, there's a general number that the United States has 5% of the world population, but it's got 25% of the prison population. And I think that's growing. In other words, a quarter of all humans on the planet who live in prison live in United States of America prisons. It's pretty intense. The sentencing is appalling. The injustices, the corruption. I mean, it's just awful. Really, it's pretty awful, I tell you. Anyway, this young man, young Mexican American, brought up in gangs in Los Angeles, knew nothing else. That was his life. Since 11, he was a gang. Since 12, he was in juvenile prison. And then by the time he was 16, still a juvenile, but he was sentenced like an adult and given 3 life sentences. Now, he hadn't killed anybody. He was just had gang activity. There was also this very heavy heavy sentencing to try and settle down the gangs, So anyway, I met him. He was then in the prisons, in California prisons. I think things are changing now. This is 25 years ago, more than that. There are all these gangs in prisons. So the Mexican gangs, the black gangs, the white supremacist gangs, really intense. And the psychology of the gangs ran the prisons. It was incredible. So once he got to prison, he just joined the gangs there, So then of course, having gangs, and they have their fights and they have their wars, they call them war. He was then put into the serious prisons, which is what they call permanent lockdown. Back then, it was considered against human rights. It's now very common. Where you're in your cell 23, 24 hours a day. Many people spend their entire life in isolation like that, So I was in this particular prison where there are like several thousand people in this situation. And so he has nothing else to do. And there he is. I mean, these Mexicans, they're quite intelligent and very good hearts, very open-hearted people. And so he got nothing else to do, sitting in his cell, a small cell, 2 meters by something, very small. He's only allowed to have 10 books. The inside of a pen, because you can't use the outside, because sometimes they have roommates, cellmates, you might stab somebody just in their own cell. They have 2 men, usually. So and then they're allowed a pad of paper, and that's their life. And they have 1 hour every day, sometimes not every day, walking up and down in another cell. They don't see the light, they don't see the sun, they don't feel the wind, years upon years upon years. Quite intense. So he starts to read books, and he found a book by Lama Yeshe. In the library, they had a good librarian, and you got to get the book delivered to you. So he read this book by Lama Yeshe, and he was very moved by the talk about compassion. So he wrote a letter, and that was the first letter that we had. And then it's grown now. I mean, I don't run it anymore. I gave it up in 2009, but I still have contact with a lot of people in prison. But what was But so I sent him a book, and then he wrote again, and then the whole thing grew from there, So the thing that I find so powerful, using examples of my friends in prison, this Buddhist approach that you can change your mind is very powerful when you are in a situation when you cannot change anything outside you, when you know you can't do it, you have no choice about anything. So there are the ones who really like Buddhism, they know they don't have a choice. They know the only choice they have is to change their mind. And that's the Buddhist expertise. I mean, it sounds vague. What do you mean, change your mind? We're about to talk about it, okay? And it is the hardest job we'll ever do, because instinctively We don't think that's what's going on in our mind is why we suffer. So one example I always use, which is an extreme example, but extreme examples are good ones. And this is a woman, I know her now, she's out of prison. Her name is Sunny. She's quite well known in the world. She lives in Ireland, and she was accused back in the 70s. She was this hippie, hitching in Florida with her kids and her husband. Little Jewish hippie lady, And then they got picked up by these two guys. And then the police stopped the car, and the two guys killed the police and blamed the hippies. So they're on death row. So that means nobody believed them. They were these innocent people. The kids were given to her parents. Eventually her parents got killed in a car accident, so she lost her kids as well. Eventually her husband, she was in there for 17 years. Eventually the husband, also in prison, he was executed. She was even allowed to go to the execution, and his head burst into flames. I'm like, you can't imagine this kind of like, almost like a cliched intensity of suffering, 1 year after the other. She spent years in solitary on her own with a Bible. Now, that is the recipe for most of us to go completely mad, and reasonably enough. But she's not even a Buddhist. She did yoga and things, but she had this extraordinary ability. She said at one point, when I first read about her, now I know her, she lives in Ireland, she's old now, and she works with another man from Ireland who's also accused of killing 2 policemen, and he was on death row, but they're both found to be innocent, and now they're working with other people who've come out of prison, these wonderful human beings. But Sunny, she had this incredible ability, she wasn't a Buddhist, to understand. She understood. She could work. She said, I understood I had the choice to think differently. So she said, I remember reading about her, she said, I finally realized that I could not change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided, she said, I decided, I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I am not in a cell, I am in a cave. I mean, that sounds pretty intense, unbelievable. And so meaning what I meant, so then what she did was she used her yoga, she made her own decisions about how to think. She said she decided to give up being angry. She decided to stop all the craziness, the anxiety, the rage, the anger, the despair, the depression, all the junk that we know we experience. Even in the mildest things go wrong. We can't control our minds. We know this. And this is the tragedy. We don't believe we can change those thoughts. We think we are stuck with it. That's the nightmare, Or we know we're feeling miserable, but we think the person has to change. The police have to change. The government has to change. The husband has to change. So we do everything in our power to make everything else change. You might be successful sometimes. And it doesn't even, and this is the point for her, she never gave up trying to change the outside. She never gave up trying to get her freedom. She didn't, when you work on your mind, it doesn't mean you become passive. No, the result of her working on her mind was she became sane and clear and wise and fulfilled and actually even compassionate. So by the time she got out of prison 17 years later, she wasn't a completely destroyed human being. I mean, we can hear these words, they are so simple. This is the expertise of the Buddhist approach. This is the essence of the Buddhist approach. But it's not moralistic, it's not heavy, it's not I am the blame, it's not, oh, you mean the husband can do what he likes, none of those. It's much more nuanced than that, Excuse me a second. It's learning to become conscious of what on earth is going on in our own mind, so that we can learn to navigate the thoughts and change them. Change them from what to what? From neurotic, fear-based, angry, despair, depression, anxiety, hopelessness, to clear, kind, confident, optimistic. I'm not trying to be cliched. I'm not trying to sound like a saint. This is the approach. And these are words we all understand. This is not religion. It's practical, And the thing is, she wasn't a Buddhist. I'm not trying to say Buddha even owns this approach. He's not the boss of this approach. He happens to be an expert at it, that's all. She understood this already. It was amazing. And I remember at the same time I read about her, when I first read about her, years ago, I read about another man on death row in America, and this is really not uncommon. You read the news every day now. There are thousands of, or many, many people working very devotedly, trying to get people released from prison who are literally innocent, people on death row. I mean, unbelievable in this country. I'm sure it's the same everywhere, but the degree of it here is pretty powerful. So this other fellow, he was on death row. He was accused of murder that he didn't do, but he would be what we call normal. He went completely out of his brain. He was completely crazy with rage, despair, unbearable suffering and pain, which is totally understandable. The difference between them was she had the miracle of the ability to know she could change her mind. And what is the benefit of that? What did she change her mind to? She changed her mind from despair, rage, anxiety, depression, to patience, kindness, optimism, self-confidence. I mean, these words are so simple, but the concept is kind of profound, So what's attachment got to do with all this? Let me now get to the point. This is Buddha's analysis, okay? Psychological analysis. The crucial point, first of all, the starting point, which is implied by the word Buddha. Buddha implies ridding the mind of all the junk, the fears, the dramas. Da implies developing to perfection all the goodness. So clearly, from day one in this analysis of the Buddhas about the way the mind works, is that there is this clear distinction in the mind between the neurotic, unhappy, fear-based states of mind and the reasonable, appropriate, open, positive states of mind. These words negative and positive sound very naive. We don't like to use these words in modern psychology. They sound very judgmental. But this is crucial if we want to understand Buddhism. It's crucial to understand the meaning of this word negative or positive. Don't hear it as moralistic. It's not like that. Demetrios, can you mute yourself, please? Demetrios.
Oh, excuse me.
No, don't worry, darling.
Excuse me.
Don't you worry.
What?
That's okay. Thanks, honey. That's good. So then, so let's look at the names look at these so-called negative, unhappy states of mind, and what's the structure of them. Because the Buddhist view of the mind, like I said, these Indians 3,000 years ago mapped the mind internally, not the brain. And how? Because they were able to go inside in this very subtle, clear, precise way, which is not known to us in our culture. It's very interesting. So okay. I think in this Buddhist analysis of the contents of the mind, well, first of all, there are two when you study the mind in Buddhism, there's a particular text, and I'm sure you're going to be studying it. I'm sure. Have you taught Anne? Have you taught Lorig yet? Anne, have you studied it?
No, we are just, we will start now discovering Buddhism, and I did the introductory to Buddhism.
Oh, good. Okay, great. But it would be really, one of the modules is the mind, but it would be wonderful at some point to really study it in more depth. Maybe Gendun would do it, or one of your other wonderful monks from Nalanda, Anyway, when you study the mind, you first study the epistemological model of the mind, and then you study the psychological model. So the first one is already fascinating. That's how the mind functions. In Buddhism, it's so fascinating, it's so intricate, it's so fascinating. And again, we're not discussing the brain. We're discussing the internal cognitive process, the way we cognize things. It's super fascinating, I tell you. And listen, I'll mention something there. It's already very fascinating. We've got, in that model, we know, this is true, we understand this, we've got sensory consciousness. That part of our mind, remember in Buddhism, we're not discussing the physical. Mind is not physical. So sensory consciousness, eye consciousness, ear consciousness. Consciousness is not physical. So it's that part of our mind that functions through the medium of the eyeball, from the nerves and the eardrum and all the bits and pieces working nicely. But the consciousness part is not physical. Always in Buddhism, it's not physical. So then eye consciousness, all the senses, actually the Buddhist analysis is, all the sensory consciousnesses are profoundly limited in the way they cognize things. So, I might say to you, oh, that's a really beautifully designed thermos. I think it is. That's why I chose it on the internet. I like design. I like the shape. So I will say, I can see a really nicely designed thermos. When I hear one note of trumpet, jazz, I'll go, wow, Miles Davis, and I'll bliss out, So now, as Lama Yeshe says, we make the body the boss. And this is a major way to begin to understand how to navigate our mind, to understand the power of our senses, to understand how we give them huge power that they actually don't have. And this is my point. This is a really crucial point, how the mind works. So when I say I see a well-designed thermos, that's not a possibility, because the I consciousness is, all the senses are profoundly limited. Every part of our mind always cognizes something. It's the way they talk. There's mind, and then there's something it cognizes. Well, I consciousness, does it cognize? Precisely two things: only shape and color. That's it. Ear consciousness does not cognize Miles Davis. It does not cognize trumpet. It does not cognize wow, divine. It cognizes mere sound. This is not just meant to be intellectual. This is very powerful. So if my eyes can only see shape and color, the question is, which part of my mind cognizes a nicely designed thermos? Well, that's your mental consciousness. We've got the sensory consciousness, and then we have the mental consciousness. And as Lama Zopa says, that's where the workshop is. That's where all the thoughts and feelings and emotions and unconscious and subconscious and instinct and intuition, this entire spectrum of our inner being, this is our mental consciousness. This is what we have to pay attention to. This is what we have to unpack and unravel. This is where the source of our happiness and suffering is. The sense is not. So what happens is this is what happens. I consciousness sees here, and then in the mental consciousness, and Tibetans always point here when they say the mind. Because the Buddhist view is that everything we've ever experienced, nothing goes astray. Everything is stored in our mind as memories. So I've collected, just in this life, Buddha talks about past lives, but never mind that. I've collected thousands of views and ideas, and I like this and I don't like that, and I want this and that's this. We've got all these thousands of thoughts and memories stored in our mind. So the millisecond my eye consciousness sees this shape and color, this is not a joke, quicker than Google, my mental consciousness is accessed, okay? And then up comes out of my mouth, what a well-designed thermos. Well, what's that? That is a concept, a thought. So whatever's in the mental consciousness at the level we function at is a series of thoughts. Now we get to the point. Now, then we go to the psychological model of the mind, and now we study and look into the contents of these thoughts, these thousands of thoughts. And they're all thoughts. So basically, Buddha divides all of them, the contents of our mental consciousness, into three categories. Those that are deluded, neurotic, self-centered, I-based, fear-based, miserable. We know them. I just said them before. Attachment, anger, fear, jealousy, depression, you name it. There's that category. Then there's a next category called love, the virtuous ones, the positive ones, love, kindness, intelligence, many of these. And the third category, I like to call them the mechanics of the mind, which are the parts of our mind like concentration, good memory, intention, attention, discrimination, vigilance. There's many of these. And these are neither negative or positive in their character, but they're crucial. A thief needs mindfulness. Mindfulness is the ability to not forget what you're doing moment by moment. A sniper needs very good concentration. So whether you're a meditator or a murderer, you need concentration, good memory, intention, attention, discrimination. That's that category. But the stuff that we're concerned with is to begin to distinguish between the neurotic, fear-based, unhappy, distressing, disturbing, horrible states of mind that break our hearts and cause us to harm others. Look at the world. And the positive stuff, the stuff that's the source of our happiness. This is the job. It's quite an intricate job to do. No wonder we need some concentration meditation. Now, let's analyze the neurotic ones, because they're the problem. So there's thousands of these. There's a whole map of the mind. Like Buddha identifies 84,000 distinct mental problems. But he narrows them all down to three. If you read Buddhist books, you're going to read about the three poisons. It sounds very cute. The three toxic emotions. And they sound so simple. So the root of, there's a hierarchical relationship between these three. And these are the source of all the other dramas in our mind. So these three, the first one, and we won't go into that much, but we'll just discuss it briefly. This is a primordially deep assumption, and a deep assumption of an unhappy, separate, lonely, concrete, solid, set in stone me. It's primordially deep. It's the main neurotic state of mind, so deep we don't even recognize it. Now we get to the next one. That's called attachment. Effectively, for the Buddha, this is the main source of our problems. Big surprise, because if we use this word in our daily life, we use it to be equivalent to love or kindness or being close to somebody. She's attached to her family. That's our definition, but we need to understand Buddha's definition here. We all know the same word can have many definitions. So it's crucial when you hear the Buddhist definition, otherwise you're going to get very depressed. And now we're going to get to the point of the whole discussion. What is this attachment? And then the third one is called anger or aversion. So attachment and aversion, simple words. Attachment and aversion, both the consequence of the root one. We'll leave the root one alone. So now let's look at attachment and why it is the source of all our pain. It's kind of the basis, you know. Okay. So now let's look at attachment. It's all these states of mind, like attachment and aversion, the way the Buddha describes, are deeply ingrained, deeply instinctive. We come born into this life with them. Okay, his analysis of where they come from, not from our parents, but from ourselves. This is the Buddha's view, but we won't go to there at the moment. So this attachment, what is it? It's multifaceted. And when I say all these words, you're going to recognize every aspect of it. So the most primordial level of his attachment, virtually at the level of just this energy, an utter assumption of truth. The energy of attachment at the deepest level, and we're born with it, is deep dissatisfaction. The level we experience it at in our life is actually self-hate. I am never satisfied. No matter what I get, not enough. How much the boyfriend tells me he loves me, not enough. How much weight I lose, not enough. How much money I have, not enough. But the real dissatisfaction is that I am not enough. And that turns into this self-loathing. This is the irony of this one. This is the irony of ego in Buddhism. This is its main voice. And that's from practicing this attachment for many lifetimes, Buddha says. It's this primordial feeling of dissatisfaction. And that then on the basis of that dissatisfaction, this is the next level of attachment. Of course, if you're dissatisfied with what you are, with what you've got to find something to fill it up, don't you? You've got to find something to fill up the gaping hole. So the grossest level of attachment, which is meaning for cakes and boyfriends and money and things out there, music, the sense objects, that's the most obvious, grosser level of attachment. The outside world, basically. It becomes this emotional hunger, you know? And the assumption is I don't have enough, I am not enough, so I've got to find something. So it's constantly looking, constantly yearning and looking. And then depending on your habits, it'll be cake, food, money, a family, a husband, you name it, you know? You name it. We all recognize this. So then we'll say, but isn't this normal? Well, yes, it is normal. But don't forget, we haven't looked yet at the next category of states of mind, which are our positive ones. So before we go further, what are they? Love. What's love? Delight in someone else's happiness. What's compassion? A sadness at someone else's suffering. We have all of these, and these are working alongside the attachment and the anger, but the attachment and the unhappy ones, you know, they're not working isolated. We've got the good ones too, there's no question, but we're trying to distinguish between them to see the difference. That's the analysis we have to do, which is really tough. So attachment is this emotional hunger. So then let's say you want the boy, you want the family, you want the house. None of this has been critical, it's just looking at how we all work. So then, of course, you manipulate to find one. You think about it all the time. You think about what you're missing. You haven't got a boyfriend, so you feel lonely. So you convince you've got to get a boyfriend, convince you've got to get the family, the children, whatever the thing is. We think about it. One of the functions of attachment is you think about it all the time. And then you manipulate to get it. And then when you get it, you control it. And then you possess it. All of these are functions of this state of mind that's called, this simple word called attachment. It's multifaceted. We're familiar with every one of these things. And why is all this happening? Because there's an utter belief going through this attachment that when I get that, the pain will go away. When I get that, I will fill up the hole. When I get that, happiness will come. This is the analysis. We don't articulate it like that. It's just so instinctive. So alongside that, you've got love and kindness. You might be a very patient, very kind, very loving person also. But what we don't notice is this attachment component, that it pollutes and drags down the positive ones. So if you've got a lot of attachment, it'll pollute your love. Meaning you got love, you do love. Okay, what is love? You love your new boyfriend. That means I want him to be happy. This is a valid state of mind. This is a joyful state of mind. You want your boyfriend to be happy. That's love. Incredible. When he has a headache, you have compassion. Incredible. But what we don't notice is the presence of the attachment, the fear, the manipulating, the controlling of him, the possessing of him. So that pollutes your love. And usually we only love those we are attached to. So when he gives you up for a younger version, the love and the compassion turn off like a tap. We know that. So because why? Because now attachment is no longer getting what it wants. Attachment is a junkie in us that is hungry to get only the nice things, which is meaning only what I want. So when the boyfriend fulfills my wishes and loves me and is wonderful, is kind to me and good to me, wonderful, I'll be so happy. But the millisecond he doesn't satisfy my attachment, the millisecond he doesn't look at me properly, the millisecond he slurps his tea when he drinks it in the morning for breakfast, the millisecond he's late for a meeting, what arises now? The third of these three poisons, aversion. It too is multifaceted. The volatile expression of aversion, we all know it. It's called anger. You shout and yell and scream, That's what we call anger. Well, the state of mind that impels it is aversion. And aversion is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So these two are working at a most deep primordial level, at the level of total instinct. Nobody teaches us this. We don't hear this analysis. We don't notice this process happening inside us because it's totally instinctive, because we've been practicing it for perfection for countless lifetimes, Buddha says. So aversion, the bare bone state of mind, which is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants, and that could be 1,000 times a day, but very small levels of it, but we don't notice. So aversion also is multifaceted. The grossest level of it, the most volatile, like I said, is anger. Shout and yell and scream. How dare you, don't listen to me. How dare you do that? We know people like that. That's a strong level of aversion, which is the response when your attachment doesn't get what it wants. When it's the response when he doesn't do what your attachment wants. I mean, it sounds very brutal, but this is exactly how it works. So then anger is the most volatile level of aversion. But this is the tricky part. The milder levels of aversion, which you will all recognize every day, which we never pay attention to. Irritation, annoyed, upset, frustrated. You get anxious. All of these are variations of aversion. So in other words, you might not be a volatile person who shouts and screams, but maybe your husband doesn't, the sound of him eating his breakfast irritates you. You never think that's called anger. It's a mild level of anger, and it's because your attachment wants only to hear nice sounds. Your attachment only wants him to do what your attachment wants. It sounds brutal, but this is the way attachment is working. But the trouble is it's mixed with love and kindness, so we can't tell the difference. But that's the analysis we have to learn to do. As Lama Yeshe puts it, our Lama, you need to learn to be your own therapist, and it demands this level of clarity, and it just takes time, I promise you. So then when you start to see it at this level of conceptual. Now, I haven't finished with aversion yet, sorry. The volatile level of aversion is anger. The milder levels are irritated, annoyed, frustrated, and we know we have that 1,000 times a day. And then the deepest level, the most subtle, underneath is depression, despair. It's a build-up. Everything builds up, One day there'll be the straw that breaks the camel's back and you can no longer get out of bed. because the aversion, the mild levels of annoyed, upset, fearful, frustrated, annoyed, frustrated, day after day after day, have built up, and now you have depression. This is a simple Buddhist analysis of these states of mind, you know. And the attachment and aversion, we're running between these two all the time. They're intimately connected. You can't have one without the other. The others then that come from this, you know, like arrogance and low self-esteem and jealousy and all the others are like branches of these two. These are the fundamentals. So that's why this 3 poisons sounds so cute. You know, you don't go to your therapist, oh, I got the 3 poisons. She'll tell you to shut up and go home. Wait till you want to kill your husband. You don't just go to you don't go to the therapist when you get annoyed. Nobody thinks annoyed is a mental problem, but it's the beginnings of anger, and it builds up. Anxiety is this meeting point between attachment, hungrily wanting what it wants every second, and then not getting it. And so it's like a panic attack. That's what control freak means. You want to control everything to make it what your attachment wants. It's really quite subtle, these workings of these minds, but they sound so simple. Attachment, anger. But the analysis of it is quite, and it takes time, you know. Lama Yeshe said, I can tell you about attachment for a whole year. You'll never begin to understand it until you start unpacking in yourself, noticing it, ever more subtle, every second. And this is every second. And it's because it's so automatic, it's instinctive, so we don't pay attention. So that's a bit of a background. Now I need you to ask me some questions and see how we go with discussion. And then we can continue to unpack these things. Any questions at all that you'd like? If there's not, I'll keep talking, no problem.
I have a question.
Who is I? I want to see you. Flavio. Okay, good, Flavio. Talk to me.
Yes.
Good. Wonderful.
It's one thing that I realized because I practiced for a while, and I realized if I move from place to place, the people who are in a place can influence my mood. I'm drawing now. I did this because I'm getting quite sensitive about things. So it's a nice thing.
Good.
But,
okay.
What I'm doing, if I go somewhere else, I'm drawing very dark things.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. We're very influenced by the outside world, Flavio. Exactly. Yeah. So the question?
So
the question?
The question is how to shield myself.
Good.
From people who have very, very, very negative thoughts.
Exactly.
Because they cling on me sometimes.
No, I understand that, Flavio. No, it's a really good question. So first of all, okay, the bigger picture again here, what you just stated, it's really evident, isn't it, that we are very social beings. There's no question about that. We're born in a human body. We have sisters and aunties and uncles and neighbors and dogs and rats and cockroaches and friends and enemies. All our life, we're connected with other beings. So in other words, Flavio's point, we're influenced by the outside world. Hardly rocket science. We all get this. Now, the point is, taking the first point that I made, which is and Flavio's not saying this, but I'm using this as an analysis, the usual view we have is that, you know, it's the boyfriend that's the problem. It's those alcoholics over there that are the problem. It's that mean, ugly Mr. Trump and his crazy maniac white supremacists who are the problem. So the world is full of people who do bad things. Flavio's point, there are people who are crazy. Join the universe, folks. There are people who are driven by attachment and anger and rage and despair. And eventually, when we understand our own mind, we'll be able to have compassion for them. But we're not at that level yet. We're still fragile at the first stages of practice. There's a nice analogy in Buddhism that a bird needs 2 wings. I quote it all the time. And I'm discussing here the first one, which is called the wisdom wing. This is the nuts and bolts of what we need to do to unpack and unravel our own mind, our own neediness, our own fears, our own attachment, our own fragility, and protect ourselves. In that level, we need to protect ourselves. We need to find a perfect environment, if we can, so we don't get distracted by all the crazy world, because we're not really very qualified yet. Now, by the time we've worked on our mind and got rid of attachment and anger and pride and jealousy and fears, we are very powerful and very confident and very content. And now we can deal with the crazy world, and now we can practice the compassion wing. So the wisdom wing is like preparation, you know. So you've got to find conditions that are conducive for you to do the work internally, because your job is to work on your mind. So your job, Flavio, is to know your own mind. You don't blame the outside world. You do not point fingers because you realize they're in the same boat as you, but because you haven't done enough work yet, you are very fragile. You can't handle the outside world. So you need to know your own self, and you attempt to choose those conditions. That's a great luxury, but it's very necessary if you can do it, but without arrogance and without blame. Do you hear me? Do you hear my point, Flavio? Because we are so fragile. Now, this is a really good example for me as myself. As a kid, I was one of 7 children, the second in a row of 7, or actually 8, but one died, all very close in age, and we're all very volatile, all very bossy people like me. Anyway, the point is, it was we were poor. I mean, our dear mother sent us to the most expensive Catholic convent. I joke that she still owes the bills 70 years later, never mind that. But anyway, because there was this condition of lots of kids, we had to share beds, we're all very volatile, we had our father was I love my father, but it wasn't exactly a happy family, very dysfunctional. So there was lots of emotion and lots of shouting and lots of yelling, and every one of us each responded in our own way to support. Some people got asthma, one sister became kind of completely quiet and would stay away, but I was volatile, I was angry, I would jump into the middle of all the problems. I was a bully to my poor sisters. So I was a really naughty girl. But internally, I was in love with God. I wanted to be a nun. I wanted to be a priest. I didn't even talk about these things because I was so naughty, but it was my internal world. So what happened was, when I was about 12, I stole my mother's earrings and her lipstick and her high heels, and I wore this little skirt and little dress, and I started walking down our main road, and I was trying to seduce the greengrocer's son. He was 16. And my mother found out, and she completely freaked out. Of course she did. I was 12 or something. So she made me go to boarding school. It was the convent that I was already going to, but they also took boarders. So she made me go and live there. Well, you know what happened to me overnight? Because, this is my point, Flavio, the conditions completely changed. I had discipline. I went to mass every morning. It fed that part of myself that crazy family could not feed. And it's not blaming my family, but the conditions are so important. But our problem in our world, we blame the conditions. Do you see my point, Flavio? It's a very different point. But so those conditions, they encourage the better part of me to grow. So that was perfect for me. Are you hearing my point, Flavio? Are you hearing it? So the problem in our culture, we blame the outside, and we don't think that our mind plays a role. Our mind totally plays a role, but in the beginning, we have to give ourselves the right conditions until our mind is so powerful and so strong. Then we can control, then we will not be disturbed by the external conditions, Flavio, because we'll have such compassion that we'll be happy to help others because we're so together. Can you understand that point, Flavio? So this is why my friend Sunny, she was dropped in the deep end. She had no chance to work on her mind on her own with a luxury. She had no choice. She was in this complete insane environment, but she was able to manage. She was incredible, very courageous. Are you seeing what I'm saying, Flavio? Are you understanding my point?
I understand.
What's your question now then?
It's very, very difficult sometimes, maybe for some people, not for everybody, that when they enter an environment, new kind of thoughts appear. And these kind of thoughts are not mine.
No, they are yours. They have to be yours, Flavio. They are. But my point is, no, they are your thoughts. You wouldn't have them otherwise. But you are, because you cannot control your mind yet, because you don't know your mind well enough yet, you get influenced by other thoughts. That's the point I'm making. That's the whole point I'm making. My friends, the young Los Angeles gangsters, they only knew the gang environment. They thought like a gangster. But you take them out of that environment and you put them in the prison where they were on their own, and then the goodness was able to grow in them and they were able to find who they really were. That's exactly what happened to me at boarding school. Can you see the point? They are your thoughts, Flavio. Do not say they're somebody else's. But you just don't have enough power to control your mind yet. That's the point I'm discussing here. Can you see the point or not?
So I have to change the condition to put
If you can
myself
change the condition, it's a luxury that you need. And then the real work happens. You start to work on your mind. And when you really are in control of your mind in the way that I'm describing here in the Buddhist approach, you can be around the psychopaths and you will not be influenced because you're so wise and so clear and so together. And because now you have such compassion, you only want to help others. That's the point. But you've got to work on your mind, baby. Your job is to work on your mind. Find the best conditions to do that. And if you can't, you do your best, baby, because we can't always change everything. But your mind is the point. Never forget that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, Flavia. Thank you. Anybody else? Anyone else?
Yes, I have a question.
Good, Gina.
What about the bad things you see in others are your reflection? It's through this point.
Gina, that's a really, really important question, and we need to unpack it. It's really important because it can be a mixture of both. So I don't know if you've been noticing the news in the United States lately, but everybody reads about Mr. Trump, don't they? And I'm only talking now, in my opinion, that I'm reading about some of those people who have these conspiracy theories. Do you understand about conspiracy theory, Gina? And these conspiracy theories, these QAnon people believe that, the devil is running the show and Mr. Trump has been chosen by God and he's got to destroy the devil, and that all these, Hillary Clinton and all these people are pedophiles and they're eating babies. I mean, this is literally what some people say. Now, can you hear those words? They sound a bit extreme. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Would you agree that's a bit of an extreme opinion about somebody? Would you agree it's an extreme opinion?
Yes.
Would you agree with that? Okay, now, if you're even if you're slightly angry and your boyfriend has been mad at you, you're mad at your boyfriend, let's say, you have to decide what is fact and what is not. So anger, you see, this is now we're getting to the point about the delusions. Now we're really getting to the point. One of the key functions Buddha's saying about attachment and anger and all the other dramas, low self-esteem, jealousy, one of the key functions is that they exaggerate. Anger, if I've got a very volatile anger, as soon as, if you're my friend and I notice you not quite listening to me perfectly, I will get extremely angry. How dare you not listen to me, Gina? You're so mean. You don't like me. I know you don't like me. You already know Robina's crazy. She's making up stories. I'm exaggerating because I've got anger. So a person who's got a conspiracy theory has got anger, and God knows what their mind is completely made up a total fantasy. Well, my anger made up a fantasy. You didn't do anything wrong at all, but because I'm so sensitive with my attachment, and my attachment is so hungry for you to behave exactly like I want, then I get really angry and accuse you of doing something. So then you can see I can't see reality clearly. So anger exaggerates the badness of somebody. Attachment exaggerates the goodness of somebody. So we're living in these lies all the time, Buddha says, depending on how strong they are. So that's what we have to learn to know about our mind. We have to distinguish what is true and what is not. Now, if the boyfriend punches you in the nose and everybody else saw it, that's not a lie. It's a fact. He punched you in the nose. So that's the truth. But what we can't see is that if you're a very angry person and then you suddenly, from that one punch, you decide the whole of the boyfriend is evil, you're never going to forgive him as long as he lives, and he's got to go to prison and he's got to die because he punched you. That's an exaggeration. He punched you once. Okay, it's not cool to punch, but all the delusions, the Buddhist approach is they exaggerate, and that's the problem. So facts are facts. Now, I was a political activist years ago, and I would have lots of anger. So I'd be out there demonstrating and shouting and yelling. What I was seeing was true. It was injustice. There was injustice. But my anger exaggerated. And when you've got anger, you can't see the truth. You can't be reasonable. You can't just work out what to do. That's the key thing about the Buddhist analysis of attachment and anger. They exaggerate, and we run between these all the time. So some things can be true. But other times it can be complete fabrication, complete fantasy. I mean, believing that Hillary Clinton eats babies, it just seems insane to even think someone could make up that view. But millions of Americans completely believe it, totally believe. But that's all I'm getting at, is that's an exaggeration of what every day we are doing. Anger exaggerates the person's badness. Attachment, if you're in love with your boyfriend, Everybody else concedes that he's a liar, he cheats, he steals from you, but because you're attached to him, attachment makes up a fantasy about this divine person, and you're as blind as anything, and you can see no truth whatsoever. And then when you discover the truth, you get raging, angry, and now you call him a monster. We run between these extremes all the time. And so the job, the Buddhist analysis, when we lessen attachment and lessen anger and lessen jealousy and lessen anxiety, we're able to see things more clearly, and we are more realistic and therefore more content. Are you with me, Gina, or not?
Yes. It's not the full idea what I want to ask.
I'm sorry. What's your question?
I meet a person, and I don't know why, but I can't deal with.
What? You what?
I can't deal with that person.
You can't what? You can't what?
It's annoying. It's annoying me.
Yeah, but Gina, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly, I am answering that question. So that person annoys you. That means in your mind, anger is there. Very small anger. That's what annoyance is. You don't know why. So that's exactly my point. Because in your mind, anger arises that causes this person to look annoying to you. And you're trying to ask me, how do I know if I'm correct or not? That's what you're asking me, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm answering. Well, that's what I'm answering. When you see something through if you've got your angry glasses on, the person will look ugly, and you don't know the difference. If you don't look at your mind, you will normally just believe, oh, he's such a creep. We will say that. But that's because you've got your angry glasses. Your angry glasses are causing him to look ugly. But if you take your angry glasses off and you have your reasonable glasses, you will then see part of it is your mind interpreting him, and part of it is maybe something that he actually did do. You've got to see the difference. That's my entire point. I use the extreme example of these conspiracy theories, or I use even the next example of if your boyfriend punches me in the nose, it's clear he did punch you. But still, your mind is playing a role, because if you have lots of anger, you will never forgive him. You will think he's evil. But another person who doesn't have much anger will forgive him and not suffer so much. So it's what's in your mind that distorts and exaggerates what's out there.
Yeah.
Can you hear my point?
Yeah.
And that's the job, to learn to distinguish between what is true and what is not. But we go between extremes. When just as an example, you just gave the example of a person who just annoys you. What about the example of another person, you look at him and he's just gorgeous and makes you so happy? It's exactly the same. He looks gorgeous to you. But it also could be a lie. It's just your attachment painting a picture of a lovely person. One day you got your attachment glasses on and the person will look delicious. Another day you have your angry glasses on and he will look ugly. We've got to look, there are some facts out there. We have to distinguish those facts, but our mind is making up so much on top of the facts. And that's the job we have to do. You understand? Are you sure you understand what I'm saying? So it demands inner work. We need to see our own mind. We need to see what we are bringing to it, not just what he is doing. There's always these two things.
Yeah.
You understand? It's a really fine point. It's a very fine point, and that demands the work inside. Absolutely. What else, people? No other questions?
Dear Venerable Robina, when discussing with friends the natural law of karma, very often people tend to feel offended and feel that they are told they are responsible for everything negative they have experienced in their lives.
Yes.
Are all of the negative and positive experience created by previously created karma?
Yes.
Or are some experiences unrelated to anything, random?
I think it's best that we have a break now, and I will discuss that after the break, because it's a whole new topic.